What is going on, you guys? Welcome back to another video and to the channel. So for this video, I'm going to be installing the first mod on my new F80 M3. So taking a look here at the F80, I don't know about you guys, but the thing that stands out most that is bothering me about this car is the wheel gap. As you guys can see in the front here, the car is sitting up pretty high, and even in the rear too, you guys can see. And like most other car guys, I like a clean, flush wheel fitment. So, with that being said, I'm going to be installing some EMD lowering springs with some KSB Motorsport wheel spacers to get this wheel fitment looking much cleaner and more flush with the fenders. Now, some of you may be wondering why I didn't go with a coilover kit or a height adjustable lowering spring kit. For me personally, I don't think those would be necessary for what I'm trying to achieve with this car. As you guys know, I absolutely love how this car drives on the stock suspension setup, and I want to do my best to keep that factory ride quality and feel that comes with the stock suspension setup as best I can. But at the same time, I do want to lower the car a bit and get more of a clean, flush wheel fitment and stance. And based off my research, lowering springs are the best way to go to do just that. I looked at tons of pictures of F80s and F82s with these EMD lowering springs and some spacers. And to me, the ride height and wheel fitment looked just fine. So going with lowering springs will allow me to lower the car and get a nice clean, wheel fitment and stance with the car, while also, for the most part, keeping the factory ride quality and feel. I know the factory ride quality and feel will be sacrificed a little bit, but from what I was reading from other people's review of these springs, it is pretty close to the factory ride quality and feel. Maybe later down the road, I'll try out a coilover kit or a height adjustable spring kit. But for right now, I think these lowering springs are a quick, easy solution to getting rid of this wheel gap on this car, while also maintaining the factory ride quality and feel that I am enjoying quite a bit right now. So anyway, moving on here, let me go ahead and show you guys the new EMD lowering springs and the KSB Motorsport wheel spacers. So here are the EMD lowering springs. What I like about these is that they just come in a simple black color. So they basically just blend in with the rest of the suspension components. You can see here they come with a spacer for the rear. I am going to be using these because I do not like the raked look that the car will have without these spacers. I like it to be more of a, proportionate ride height front to back. So yeah, that's just me personally, but you can definitely go without these if you like the look that comes with not having the spacers in the rear. And then over here you guys can see the KSP Motorsport wheel spacers. I decided to go with a 12mm spacer both in the front and the rear. Originally I wanted to go 15mm, but it kind of seemed like 15mm would be too much. So I just decided to play it safe and get the 12mm. But if it still ends up being too narrow or maybe even too wide with the 12mm, I'll just, get a different size spacer. Not really that big of a deal, but I think these will fit just fine. And then most importantly here, they come with extended lug bolts, since we are adding quite a bit of space between the wheel and the wheel hub. So yeah guys, nothing crazy here. The EMD lowering springs are $350, and then these specific wheel spacers from KSB cost, I believe, $80. So yeah, this whole setup here is fairly cheap to get this wheel fitment looking much better. Hopefully it turns out how I am expecting it to. So before I get started here, I just wanted to show you guys some measurements of the stock ride height. And then after I install the lowering springs, I'll take a measurement again to see just how much these lowering springs lower the car. So starting with the front here, let's go ahead and see. See, it's flat on the ground there. See there? It looks like it's a little below 27.5 inches. So we'll go ahead and just say 27.5 inches in the front. And then for the rear here, it looks like it's at about 26.5, like a little tiny bit below 26.5 inches off the ground. So now that I have that, I'll go ahead and get started on installing these lowering springs. So the first thing I'm going to do here for the front is remove all of this plastic and rubber covering so that I can get access to the top of the strut. So now with all of the covering removed, I can now see the nut that is securing the top of the strut. Now before I actually remove this nut, I'm gonna have to do a few things first down here. So the first thing I'm gonna do down here is place a smaller jack underneath the lower control arm. This way I can compress the spring. So I compress the spring to the point at which the car is on the verge of lifting up even higher. So now I can go ahead and remove the sway bar end link along with the adaptive suspension connection here and the brake pad and I believe wheel speed sensor here. So at this point I disconnected everything I need to disconnect down here. Now I am doing the passenger side. So this side does not have the headlight leveling sensor or the brake pad sensor, so those are two extra things I'm going to need to remove on the driver's side. I'm probably not going to film doing the driver's side since it's basically what I just did on this side, but I'll probably go ahead and add some footage of me removing the brake pad sensor and then the headlight leveling sensor. So this is what the headlight leveling sensor looks like on the driver's side. Basically disconnect it from this point right here. On the back side here it's a 10mm nut, and then you counter hold with a 9mm wrench, and then it should be able to disconnect from here. And then also here is the brake pad sensor wire. Kind of runs along all the way back there into that box. You might have to use some pliers to pull this out, just so that you're not pulling it by the wire, so you don't accidentally like rip the wire out. Just use some pliers like this, and then you should just be able to pull it out like that. So now with the spring recompressed, I should be ready to remove the nut that's holding the top of the strut. Now to remove this bolt, I had to get this strut nut remover socket. It's basically a 12-point 18mm socket with an opening on the side, so that when I go back and reinstall this nut, I can torque it to spec. So yeah, let's go ahead and attempt to remove this nut. Now I'm going to go ahead and slowly lower the floor jack so that I can decompress the spring. So here's a little comparison. We have the stock spring and then the EMD spring. You can see that the EMD is a bit shorter. You can see it's not a crazy difference, but hopefully it will be just enough. So now let's go ahead and install the new EMD spring. Real quickly, I just wanted to show you guys, there's a little groove on this rubber piece here that stops as you're spinning it, as it makes contact with the end of the spring there. So if you turn it, it'll be loose, but make sure this is lined up with the end of the spring. And then same thing on the bottom right here. If you guys can see, there's a little rubber piece that blocks the spring right here from turning any further. So yeah, just make sure those two parts are lined up. Alright, so I got the strut reinserted back through the top here. So now I can go ahead and re-secure it with the nut. So now I need to torque the nut down to 25 foot-pounds of torque, but since the center of it does spin, I'm gonna need to counter hold with a 10mm wrench, and that is the importance of having an opening here in this strut socket. The torque spec for this nut here that secures the sway bar end link is 44 foot-pounds of torque. So at this point I have reinstalled everything for the passenger side. So now I'm going to go ahead and put the wheel back on with the spacers. So I just finished up installing the lowering spring on the driver's side here. So now both springs are in, and as you guys can see, these made a huge improvement in the overall ride stance and wheel fitment. That wheel gap has significantly decreased. Let's go to the other side here. Yeah, this looks so much better. So yeah, these EMD springs and wheel spacers definitely are living up to my expectations. Now I still have to do the rear on both sides, so let's go ahead and get started on that. So the rear should be a bit easier than the front since there's really only one bolt I need to remove. Well, two on this side on the driver's side, one on the passenger side. It's because this side also has a headlight leveling sensor back there that I'm gonna have to disconnect just like how I did in the front. But the main bolt that I'm gonna have to remove is the one back there. It's a 21mm bolt with a 21mm nut on the other side that I'm gonna have to counter hold. So here's a comparison of the EMD spring on the right and then the stock spring on the left here. You guys can see the EMD one is a little bit shorter. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the kit came with some spacers for the rear. So I'm gonna be putting these on top of the metal cup that goes on top of the spring up here like this. That way it doesn't give the car a raked look, which is a look I don't really like. So that is why I'm gonna be using the spacers. And then this piece here goes on the bottom like this. So yeah, let's go ahead and install this. So it has been about a week since I installed the EMD lowering springs and the KSP Motorsport wheel spacers. So the lowering springs have had some time to settle and give the car its true ride height. In addition, I've also had some time to drive the car to really get a good idea on how these lowering springs have affected the ride quality and handling when you compare them to the original stock springs that came on the car. So with that being said, let's go ahead and go over the results. So starting off with the ride height and how much these lowering springs made a difference in the ride height. Now visually, without taking any measurements, I'm sure you guys can see these lowering springs made quite a difference in the ride height. They dropped the car pretty significantly when you compared it to the original stock ride height. These lowering springs dropped the car a lot lower than I thought they would. Like at this point here, let's go ahead and get a side view here. Like it looks like the car is already on coilovers. Like I did not think these lowering springs would drop the car this low. And honestly, the car is already at a height that is good for me. I would not want to lower it much more than this. You guys know me at this point. I don't really like my cars, slammed. They don't need to be super low. I just like a clean, flush, proportionate fitment, around the fenders and the wheels. And this already does just that, just with these lowering springs. Getting a closer look here, you guys can see it is pretty low. Like I am kind of on a hill here, which isn't the most even ground to really be looking at the ride height. But I mean, you can still see the difference even though it's on a hill here. And then you can see on the other side here, you can kind of see a little better with there being less sunlight, just how much lower the car is now, and it's just like hugging the wheels. And then you can see in the rear, like the car just looks so much cleaner now without all of that wheel gap. So I almost forgot here, but I'll go ahead and take some measurements now of the ride height in the front and the back with the lowering springs now that they have settled. So for the front here, it looks like it's a little bit below 26 inches off the ground, maybe like 25.8, 0.9 inches. Now with the stock lowering springs, the ride height was at about 27 and a half, a little bit below 27 and a half inches. So it looks like the front dropped about an inch and a half, a little bit more than an inch and a half. So maybe like 1.7 inches. And then for the rear here, this one is at about 26 inches, maybe a little bit, or actually no, it's right at 26 inches, I would say. And with the stock springs, the ride height was at about 26 and a half, a little bit less than 26 and a half. So these lowering springs dropped the rear about a half inch. Now, I'm sure you guys have noticed also how much the wheel spacers have had an effect on the stance. You can see just how much more flush these wheels look with the fender. As you guys can see here, it is super flush. Now, one important thing I wanted to note is that I actually ended up switching out the 12mm spacers for 15mm. So what you see right now is with 15mm spacers, not 12. The 12 did look good also, but I wanted them to be a little bit more flush, and I wanted to get them as flush as possible without rubbing. So it looked like 3 more millimeters could fit. Now I am slightly rubbing, just barely, on the inner plastic fender liner in the rear. I'm not actually rubbing like on the quarter panel, like the fender on the quarter panel. It's just that plastic inner fender liner in the wheel well that's kind of like sticking inward towards the wheel. And sometimes it kind of rubs on that over, hard dips or bumps, but nothing significant. Like you can't really see on the wheel that it's rubbing, just like very slightly. But I believe I can maybe adjust the inner fender liner so that it doesn't rub on that. So as far as the overall look, these wheel spacers and lowering springs did an excellent job improving the overall wheel stance and wheel fitment on this car. It just looks so clean now. It looks so much better now that it doesn't have that really big wheel gap in the front, and it doesn't have that narrow wheel look with the wheels kind of inward and not flush with the fenders. Now moving on to the effects of the ride quality with these lowering springs. Back when I was doing research and looking into people's reviews and opinions on these springs, on the ride quality, most people were saying these springs did not have any significant effect on the ride quality and handling when you compare them to the stock ride quality and handling with the stock springs. And I'm happy to say I'm experiencing the exact same thing. The car feels very close to the factory ride quality and handling. It still feels pretty much the same, but like I said before, there is a sacrifice when you put aftermarket lowering springs. The car does feel a bit more bouncy and stiff, but only a little bit. Nothing significant to the point where it would bother me. At this point, I'm pretty much used to having a bouncy, stiff ride on my cars. With both of my previous BMWs being on coilovers, I am already used to having a pretty bouncy and stiff ride. But even then, this car still does not feel as bouncy as stiff. Like I said, it's only slightly more bouncy and stiff. Nothing significant and nothing compared to my E90 right now that are on, I believe, 4+ year-old BC Racing coilovers. Yeah, because that car is pretty bouncy right now and the ride quality is not the best like it once was when I first installed the coilovers. But yeah, this car feels great still, even with these lowering springs. So yeah, guys, overall, I am 100% satisfied with how this came out with these lowering springs and spacers. At this point, I don't even see a need to get coilovers. For me personally, this ride height right here is near perfect for me. I honestly don't even want to go any lower because the front is already very low and to the point of scraping over certain dips. Like my driveway has a pretty significant dip and it's already scraping on the rubber guards in the front here. Let me show you guys real quick. It is already scraping on these little rubber guards in the front here, and you can see it's like bending and to the point of like ripping, as you can see right there, because it's rubbing against the bumps that I have in my driveway so that I don't scrape. So yeah, if I go any lower, I'm definitely going to be scraping on this bumper, and I still want to get a front lip, and that's definitely probably going to be scraping a bit. So yeah, I honestly don't see a need to go any lower than this for me personally, at least for a while, a pretty long time. I am very happy with how this car looks already just on these springs, and the wheels already look very flush with the wheel spacers. Let me give you guys a closer look here, just how close they are to the fender. As you can see, I can still fit my finger in there. If I went any thicker on these spacers, it definitely would start rubbing on the fender here. But still, it looks very flush. You can see on this side just how flush they are. Look at the front here. Super flush. So there you have it, you guys. That pretty much completes this overview of these EMD lowering springs and KSP Motorsports wheel spacers. These EMD springs and spacers honestly exceeded my expectations. These turned out way better than I thought they would. The springs gave the car a perfect drop for me without even needing coilovers. With these stock 666M wheels, the 15mm spacers pushed them out just enough so they're flush with the fenders, yet do not rub significantly at least. And then the best part about the springs, you get to keep that factory ride quality, feel, and handling. So yeah, for only about $450, $500, these were an excellent first mod for me personally, for what I was trying to do with the car. So yeah, I definitely recommend these if you have an F80 or an F82. If you're looking to get that wheel gap and wheel fitment looking much cleaner and much more flush, all you need is some EMD lowering springs and some wheel spacers. As usual, I will leave a link to both the springs and the wheel spacers if any of you guys are interested in getting those for your F80 or F82. So anyway, I think that is going to do it for this video, you guys. As usual, thank you guys for watching and hope you guys enjoyed this video. Give it a thumbs up if you did and subscribe for more content if you liked what you saw. Also, feel free to check out my website, inline6auto.com, if you're looking for parts or any sort of aftermarket modifications for your F chassis, E chassis, BMW, and now G chassis. I'll leave a link to it in the description of this video if you guys want to check it out. But anyway, I will see you guys in the next video.